Hello there. Isn't it strange that the very demographic and its supporters that the Labour Party has done all it can to appease is now turning on Labour? I have zero sympathy for these Labour politicians who are encountering some pushback from the very people they supported and pandered to. The very demographic that helped Labour get its Gaza ceasefire vote through by protesting outside Parliament, making their presence very unpleasantly and uncomfortably known while chanting their anti-Semitic slogans. But now that George Galloway has made his comeback into the Commons in the way he did, the Labour Party politicians will find themselves more and more surplus to requirements as time goes on. And as a certain demographic coalesces around more radical political representation. Labour got them their foot through the door. But Labour is now beginning to outlive its usefulness. Unless, of course, Labour buckles once again to the ever more strident shouting of their preferred demographic and unequivocally support the Palestinian cause. So crack open a can, chuck a pizza in the oven and sit back to watch the left lose total control of the problematic demographic hordes they fought to bring over in the first place. It's like Christmas Day at an abattoir, watching the turkeys who voted for Christmas being introduced to their self-imposed fate. The Telegraph is running with a story about the rising number of pro-Palestine acts of intimidation against politicians, with most being aimed at Labour politicians. Oh dear, how sad, never mind. The Telegraph piece talks about a counter-extremist analysis covering the period from the 1st of January to the 15th of March, reporting that 38 incidents of pro-Palestine intimidation of politicians taking place, with Labour bearing the brunt of such activity. Well, bullies always do go after the weakest link, don't they? The counter-extremist analyst involved has remained anonymous for obvious reasons. And one example given was Haringey Council, where a meeting was repeatedly disrupted with someone who was present saying there was astonishing levels of viciousness and that the protesters were literally frothing at the mouth. And Keir Starmer has been accused of genocide by them, while David Lammy had to call off an event because of protester activity. And in another incident, a Labour shadow minister had to be protected by the police. Now, Labour is a massive advocate for multiculturalism and mass inward migration. If the Labour Party had its way, there would, in reality, be no such thing as a functioning border. It would be there as some sort of technicality, much like the welcome mat at your front door, except that your front door is usually shut and locked. Our borders are already far from that. And I fully expect Labour to latch and lock the doors wide open and throw the keys into the English Channel. And I shudder to think at how many new voters we end up with as Labour goes full woke on the electoral franchise. So all I can assume from that is that Labour will come under more and more, shall I call it, pressure to abide by the wishes of their preferred and growing demographic. Our forthcoming Labour government will have a choice. Get the riot squads out to squash these now out-of-hand pro-Palestine activists, or to, as they put it, listen to their constituents and do as they are told. But to do the second would draw the ire of the silenced majority, the so-called far right. And that, as far as I can see, is why Labour supports the plans to put more protection in place for politicians. And they will obviously not oppose the use of 117 million quid to protect mosques, Muslim schools and community centres from hate attacks over the next 4 years. And this comes after 70 million quid was given to the Jewish groups for their protection. So instead of the UK having functioning borders, we are now balkanising the UK with internal borders. What clown started all that? Oh yes, that Git Blair. Followed by just about every short-sighted vote-grubbing politicians ever since. At the end of the day, do you really think that Keir Starmer's Labour Party will get hard with these activists? If you do, I have a nice big bridge to sell you. No, they will keep on emboldening them with appeasement, hoping that they can keep capturing their votes. To the point that to keep their support, the Labour leader has to be chosen from amongst the more hardline members of that demographic. All the while the silenced majority will be kettled in, and the process of hardline hate laws obviously aimed at ordinary Scots has already started in Scotland. Just look at that latest shudderingly horrendous and childish Police Scotland hate monster advert. Do you think that the aforementioned pro-Palestine activists would be swayed to change their actions after watching that video? I'll be very surprised if their new tax hikes and now these new hate crime laws due to come into force in April doesn't see a large number of Scots relocating into England. This, ladies and gentlemen, will not end well. Richard.
Right, let's just cut to the chase here, and I have read that many of you have felt the same as me about Lee Anderson joining Reform. So that's the issue I'm going to tackle today. But before I go any further, I would like to say that I tentatively, and I would like to reinforce the word tentatively, I will still be voting Reform, even though they don't exactly represent my beliefs or views on certain issues. But in the absence of any real political representation towards my views with any chance of affecting political change in this country, I will still be voting Reform for now. And to be honest with you, I have no faith in this voting system within the framework of this illusion of democracy, which we are told is so wonderful by the ruling classes, a framework which we are told we should be oh so grateful for. Right, so this is the week that saw Lee Anderson jump ship over from the Tory party to Reform, and in his introductory speech, he praised the medical interventions, which, like many of you, I found to be very odd. I mean, those comments stuck out like a sore thumb on a python. In fact, I would say, judging by this channel's comment section, most of you viewers are split down the middle over Lee Anderson and his love of medical interventions. I mean, why would you say such a thing on your first day as a Reform UK MP? It was almost like he was trying to pee off a good contingent of Reform's supporter base in a form of self-sabotage on day one. For goodness sake, Lee, of all the things you could have praised associated with patriotism for Britain, of all the things that Britain has given the world, it had to be that one thing that you chose to speak about. So does that mean Lee Anderson's comments on medical interventions have tarnished Reform? Well, if Reform's reputation relies upon their leadership stance on medical interventions, I am afraid that ship has already sailed. Let's not forget Richard Tice's initial support of mandates, and Nigel Farage wanting to get Tony Blair in as some sort of medical intervention czar during the rollout. Now, both Nigel Farage and Richard Tice have changed their tune slightly on the safety of the arm-injected cough syrup, but Anderson's comments have, let's face it, alienated many Reform supporters who were looking to Reform as an alternative to the WEF and WHO stooges who are currently infesting Parliament. So by praising the cough syrup pushed by aforementioned institutions, this clearly demonstrates a lack of ability to read the room and reveals a worrying disconnect between the party machinery that allowed that statement out and party supporters. Yet, there is something I really like about Lee Anderson and his honesty when it comes to the courage of his convictions. If you know anything about Lee Anderson's background and history, you will know he isn't someone that messes about at all. And in that sense, he's actually probably the best person to lead Reform. Let's face it, he isn't your average career politician archetype. And because of that and his gritty demeanour, he holds potentially a far wider appeal across the political spectrum. Dare I say it, wider than the appeal of Nigel Farage. I just wish somebody would educate Lee Anderson on the safety and effectiveness of certain medical interventions. Maybe a certain Dr. Campbell should have a word with him. I think to write off Lee Anderson, though, from this one error, I would call it, might be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, especially seeing as he is the one person who is saying what not many politicians are in this country, and that is that he wants his country back. And you get the impression that he couldn't care less how that is achieved. And I like that. And I know that a lot of you like that. And so does a lot of the British population. But yes, the medical intervention comments have left a very bad taste in my mouth. And I know that many of you feel the same. But time will tell with that and his willingness to educate himself on medical interventions and to listen to the Reform supporters on this matter. Look, the real problem here is Lee Anderson is a man of action being forced to work in the Westminster world where only words matter. So the real question is, will Reform UK live up to Lee Anderson's expectations? And how long is it until Richard Tice has to have a word in his shell-like, or even sack Lee Anderson for misspeaking? And speaking of wanting, the old Britain back, recently I have been watching videos of what London and Britain were like in the 1950s, and it saddened me to look through a window in time to a country so different to this one. The London and Britain of the 1950s had a very different and more integrated and harmonious, broadly harmonious demographic, and a very different set of values and beliefs. And like many of you, I am afraid my beliefs and values tally up much closer to the beliefs of that time and place than they do with today's secularist society with its resulting absence of morality or belief in anything. The problem with secularism is it opens the door to anything goes, and one demographic in particular is waiting to take advantage of this vacuum of belief, or rather, should I say, the absence of faith and morality that built Britain. The further we move away from our Judeo-Christian beliefs and their ensuing morality which built Britain, the closer we come to embracing other moralities and faiths, which again are waiting in the wings. Our society is crumbling because the foundations which it was built upon are being dug up by progressives and another faith. All of them hell-bent on ushering in a new satanic age of tolerance where anything goes and you can do what thou wilt. Time is short. Make a stand and go to church. Yes, you heard me. Go to church. I'm turning off now. I'm not listening to this. Go to church and reinforce the foundations of the belief system that built Britain and demand of the vicar or pastor that any wokeness must be removed from any church that you attend. Please believe me, going to church is far more revolutionary and effective an act than putting a mostly meaningless tick on a ballot paper or attending any demonstration, because going to church is the ultimate expression of rejecting modern society and is thus a demonstration in its own right as you stand up together with your community in rejecting this empty secularist society. And yes, in many ways it is a vote. It's a vote for the values that built Britain, and if the gospel is preached there and you accept it, it is a vote for the salvation of your soul. Look, cash is being phased out and you can't empty your bank accounts anymore, so that form of protest is out the window. Oh, and your vote means nothing, and refusing to pay taxes it'll clobber you financially, just as going on strike will achieve nothing and clobber you financially. So the last thing you have left is church. There, at the end of every street in Britain, sits an empty building that used to be filled multiple times a week when Britain was a place envied across the world. Go and fill those church pews again and begin the fight back. And I know how hard that might actually push and go against many of your beliefs. But what do you have to lose by going other than your compliance to a way of life that is failing you and your family, and sending a message to the rulers of this world that you are not kings? There is only one king, and if you go to church and the gospel of Christ is not taught there, and in its place you find a woke version of Christianity, then go to a different church and tell the vicar on the way out how disappointed you are, and inform him of your misgivings towards the church and this woke church, and his shortcomings in delivering the true Christian message that our forefathers embraced. Anyway, what do you Horatios and Helens think about what has been said in today's video? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below for Jeff and I to read. And get yourselves over to our Locals channel for extra and much edgier content that many of you seem to be enjoying, and thanks for all the emails and support towards our content over there. And it's a great way to support the channel financially, you know, our work on this site and other places. So go on, sign up. Go on, God bless, bye for now, and get to church.